Thanks for tuning in to Crazy Mango Stories. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. The moment I found it, I felt a gut-wrenching nausea. There it was, nestled in the usual pile of emails and grocery lists, a series of messages between my wife, Camilla, and my stepbrother, Ivan. The contents were more than enough to turn my stomach, but it wasn't the explicitness that got to me. No, it was the casual familiarity, the way their conversation flowed, indicating years, not days or weeks, of deception. I couldn't react, at least not right away. Slamming the laptop closed or confronting her would give me nothing but immediate satisfaction. No, I needed something deeper, more damning. I scrolled further back in their exchanges, tracing the breadcrumbs of their affair. It had begun even before our wedding day, the two of them crafting an existence behind my back. It was all in those words, the stolen moments, the smiles exchanged across dinner tables, even messages about my own children. My hands trembled on the mouse. My eyes darted to the closed door of our bedroom, wondering how Camilla was able to lie next to me for years without me knowing her true face. And then another thought: had my mother known. I remembered a few too many odd glances between her and Camilla, always dismissing my concerns with the wave of a hand, as if shielding us from something. But now I wondered, what if she wasn't protecting the family but enabling the betrayal? That night, as I stood in the nursery, watching my children sleep, another terrifying possibility crept into my mind. Were they even mine? I would stay quiet for now, build my case, and dig out the truth before I decided my next move. Revenge would come swift and cold. But first, I needed every last piece of the puzzle. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity that almost scared me. The air between Camilla and me was thick with silence, but she didn't seem to notice. I played the part of the oblivious husband, forcing myself to smile, to keep the mask on. If I gave her even a glimpse of my suspicion, she'd become cautious, and I needed her careless. I glanced over at her as she sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, laughing at something on the screen. My stomach turned. Was she messaging Ivan right now? I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from reacting. The game had begun. While she was busy with her errands that afternoon, I rummaged through the house, searching for anything that could give me more clues. I went through her emails, scoured her messages, even checked her calendar. It was almost like I had become a detective in my own home, piecing together the evidence of her betrayal. And the more I found, the worse it got. The affair had been happening for so long that it was almost as though they considered me a non-factor, a ghost hovering in the background while they built their twisted relationship. Ivan had been to our house countless times, always with that fake smile plastered on his face, pretending to be the brother I trusted. How many times had they exchanged knowing glances while I sat beside them, unaware of the history they shared? The thought made my blood boil. But I wasn't ready to confront them yet. No, I needed more. That evening, I casually brought up the topic of our children, trying to gauge her reaction. "Do you think the kids look more like me or you?" I asked, keeping my tone light as if I didn't already know the truth. Camilla barely looked up from her phone, offering a half-hearted smile. "Oh, I don't know, probably a mix." "Why do you ask?" I shrugged, hiding my disgust behind a forced laugh. "Just wondering. It's funny, sometimes I think they look more like Ivan." For the briefest moment, her fingers paused over her phone screen. She quickly recovered, glancing up at me with a grin. "Yeah, well, families share similarities." I couldn't decide if it was guilt or fear that flashed in her eyes. But it was there, just a flicker, and then it was gone. The seed was planted. Over the next few days, I began to dig deeper. I reached out to an old friend who worked at a lab. Discreetly, I asked him about DNA tests. He didn't ask too many questions, thankfully, but told me he could get me the results within a few days if I got samples. It was time to know for sure whether my children were mine or the result of years of deception. That night, as I stood in the nursery once again, I found myself staring at my son's peaceful face. The doubt gnawed at me, threatening to unravel everything. I had to know the truth before I could exact my revenge. Only then would I burn it all down. I began collecting the samples. It was a quiet mission, one I couldn't afford to mess up. I waited until Camilla was out of the house, probably meeting Ivan, pretending to run errands. I gathered what I needed: strands of hair from both my children's hairbrushes and a few of my own. My hands shook as I sealed them in the plastic bags. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about blood, about knowing if the very foundation of my life had been built on a lie. The worst part was, I didn't know what answer I wanted. If they were mine, it meant Camilla had been playing me for years, keeping her disgusting affair going behind my back while using my children as shields. If they weren't mine, then I'd been raising another man's kids, my stepbrother's children, no less. I'd have to live with the knowledge that everything I thought was mine never belonged to me in the first place. It was the kind of torment no man could prepare for. Once I had the samples, I met my friend at a bar, handed him the evidence under the table. He didn't ask questions, and I was thankful for that. The less anyone knew, the better. He promised I'd have the results within a week, but I didn't know if I could survive the wait. The anticipation was suffocating, every minute a reminder of the knife lodged in my back. I returned home that night, half expecting Camilla to be there, her guilt written across her face. But she wasn't. I had no idea where she was, and that was probably for the best. I was starting to lose control of the mask I wore around her. My anger was bubbling too close to the surface, and I knew it wouldn't take much to shatter my facade. Instead, I sat in my car outside the house, staring at the darkened windows. The home we built together now felt like a tomb, haunted by years of deception. I'd never felt so alone. My stepbrother, my wife, and even my mother, it felt like they were all in on the same secret, conspiring to keep me in the dark, using my ignorance as their shield. How long had they been laughing behind my back? Then, there was my mother. I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew. My mother had always been overly supportive of my marriage to Camilla, too eager to praise her, too quick to dismiss my doubts. I could still remember her subtle comments, brushing off my concerns about Camilla's behavior or her closeness with Ivan. At the time, I thought she was just trying to keep the family together. But now I couldn't help but wonder, had she known all along? Had she helped cover it up? The betrayal was suffocating. I needed to confront her, to ask her what she knew, but I wasn't ready yet. I had to wait for the DNA results first. I couldn't go in without every piece of the puzzle. I would gather all the proof, and when I finally faced them, Camilla, Ivan, and my mother, I would bring their world crashing down. I wouldn't just expose them, I would destroy them. And it would start with the truth about my children. The days dragged on, each one longer than the last. Every time I heard the ding of my phone, my heart would race, thinking it was the results from the lab. But nothing came, just empty hours filled with tension. I kept up the act with Camilla, though it was growing more difficult with each passing day. I watched her closely, noticing every little detail, the way she smiled too easily when she thought I wasn't paying attention, the way she seemed more invested in her phone than in our conversations. How long had she been like this, hiding everything in plain sight? Ivan, on the other hand, had been laying low. He hadn't come around recently, but I knew it wasn't out of guilt. He was biding his time, waiting for the next opportunity to slide back into our lives as if nothing was wrong. But I was prepared. Every interaction was a chess move now, and I was several steps ahead. One evening, I found myself sitting alone in the living room after Camilla had gone to bed. The silence of the house felt oppressive, closing in on me. I needed to talk to someone, anyone, who wasn't part of this hellish conspiracy. But who could I turn to? My mind wandered to my mother again. The nagging suspicion that she had known all along grew louder with each passing day. If she had been complicit, it would make sense why she always seemed so supportive of Camilla, always telling me how lucky I was to have her. I decided it was time to pay her a visit. The next morning, I called her up and asked if I could drop by. She sounded thrilled, as she always did, but this time I could hear something different in her voice. A hesitation, perhaps. Guilt? I didn't know, but I was going to find out. When I arrived at her house, she welcomed me with a warm smile, offering me tea as she always did. But I didn't come here for small talk. After a few minutes of pretending to listen to her chatter, I finally cut her off. "Mom, I need to ask you something," I said, my voice steady, though my insides felt like they were boiling. Her smile faltered for just a second. "Of course, sweetheart. What is it?" I leaned forward, staring her straight in the eyes. "Did you know?" The color drained from her face. She tried to cover it up, laughing nervously. "Know what? What are you talking about?" About Camilla and Ivan. "Did you know they were having an affair?" I asked, my voice low but forceful. Her hand trembled as she set her teacup down. "Maxim, what are you saying?" "That's absurd." I didn't blink. "Don't lie to me, Mom." She fidgeted in her seat, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Finally, she sighed, the weight of her years suddenly visible in the way her shoulders slumped. "I didn't want to believe it," she whispered. "I hoped it was just a phase, a mistake. I thought if I ignored it, it would go away." A cold wave of fury washed over me. My own mother had known, maybe not from the start, but she had known long enough. She had watched me build a life with Camilla, raise children, all while holding on to this disgusting secret. "How could you?" I asked, my voice shaking with barely restrained anger.
"I did it for you," she whispered, her eyes pleading. "I didn't want you to lose everything."
The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Lose everything? What had I lost already? My marriage, my trust, possibly my children. Now I had lost my faith in her too. "I've already lost everything," I said coldly, standing up. "And now I'm going to make sure they lose it all too." I drove away from my mother's house, my mind swirling in a storm of anger and betrayal. Her words echoed in my head, "I did it for you." For me. She had lied to my face, let me live in a fantasy while my wife and stepbrother destroyed everything behind my back. She thought she was saving me, but all she had done was let the rot fester, letting the betrayal grow stronger until it poisoned everything. The cold air blew in through the car window as I headed back home, but it didn't cool the fire burning inside me. Every muscle in my body was tight with rage, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. What else had been kept from me? How many more lies were waiting to be uncovered? When I got home, the house was dark. Camilla was already asleep. I didn't bother turning on the lights as I walked upstairs, each step echoing in the silence of the night. The thought of climbing into bed next to her, feeling her warmth beside me, made me sick. I couldn't stand to be near her. Instead, I walked into the nursery, the one place in the house where I felt any sense of peace these days. The kids were asleep, their faces soft and innocent in the dim light. I watched them for a long time, my thoughts racing. Were they really mine? Or were they Ivan's, the product of this sick affair? I ran a hand through my hair, the weight of uncertainty crushing me. I knelt down next to my daughter's bed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her features were so delicate, so familiar, but were they mine? A part of me wanted to believe they were. Another part, the darker part, knew better than to cling to false hope. As I sat there, I heard Camilla's voice call out from the bedroom. "Max, where are you?" I didn't answer. I couldn't face her right now, not with all the anger and suspicion bubbling beneath the surface. I needed answers, not more lies. Soon, though. Soon I'd have them. The next morning, the results came in. The email from the lab pinged on my phone, and my hands trembled as I opened it. The words blurred in front of my eyes, but I forced myself to focus, scanning the lines that would change everything. I felt my breath catch in my throat, my heart pounding as the results hit me like a sledgehammer. One of the children was mine. The other wasn't. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't just some distant suspicion anymore. It was real, concrete, undeniable. Camilla had lied to me for years, made me believe I was a father to children who weren't even fully mine. The weight of the truth was suffocating. I stood in the hallway, staring blankly at the phone, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to storm into the bedroom and confront her, scream the truth at her face. But another part, the part that had been planning, scheming, knew that I needed to hold off. I had to play this carefully. Let her believe I was still in the dark while I gathered everything I needed. A revenge wouldn't come in a burst of rage. It would come slowly, coldly, methodically, and it would destroy her. I stood there in the hallway, the phone heavy in my hand as if it were the instrument of my doom. The results sat plainly on the screen. The truth lay bare, and with it, the last remnants of the life I thought I had. One child was mine, the other Ivan's. It was like a knife through the heart, slow and excruciating, twisting deeper with every breath I took. All the years I spent raising them, tucking them in at night, the bedtime stories, the laughter, all of it felt like a lie now. How could I look at them the same way again, knowing one was the product of Camilla and Yvonne's betrayal? It wasn't the child's fault, I knew that. But still, the thought gnawed at me, dark and relentless. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of whiskey, hoping the burn of the alcohol might numb the rage boiling inside me. The house was still quiet. Camilla was in the shower upstairs, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit her. I had to think, had to plan. What would I do with this truth? March in there and throw it in her face. Watch her crumble under the weight of her lies. No, that wasn't enough. She needed to pay, and not just with guilt or tears. She needed to feel the same devastation, the same soul-crushing loss that I was drowning in now. This wasn't going to end with a confrontation. It was going to end with her entire world falling apart piece by piece. As I sat there, my mind began to work to calculate. It wasn't enough to expose her infidelity. No, I needed to tear her down completely, just like she had done to me. I knew where to start. Ivan. The bastard thought he'd gotten away with it, hiding in plain sight all these years. That smug look he always had when he came around, shaking my hand, sitting at my table like family. The word felt like acid on my tongue now. I wanted to destroy him, but I had to be smart about it. I took another sip of whiskey and thought through the possibilities. Ivan had more to lose than just his secret affair. He had a reputation, a business, people who respected him. I would take all of that away. Slowly. Carefully. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Carr. An old friend from school who had connections in places that weren't exactly legal. He owed me a favor and I planned to cash in. I sent him a message, cryptic but direct. He responded almost immediately. We'd meet later in the week and I'd tell him exactly what I needed. A plan to expose Ivan's deepest secrets, to bring his entire world crashing down. But that was only the first step. I'd make sure Yvonne's name was ruined before I even confronted Camilla. I wanted her to see what I was capable of, to watch everything she had conspired to protect fall apart right before her eyes. So when the truth about Ivan came out, I'd hit her next. Publicly. I'd make sure she was humiliated, stripped of everything she thought made her untouchable. It wouldn't just be a messy divorce. I'd take the kids, the house, everything. And when I was finished, I'd walk away, leaving her in the ruins of the life she built with her lies. I finished my drink and set the glass down hard on the counter, the sound echoing in the empty kitchen. Upstairs, the shower had stopped. I could hear Camilla moving around, getting ready for the day, oblivious to the wrecking ball that was about to swing through her perfect little world. The next time I looked her in the eye, I wouldn't see my wife. I'd see my enemy. And when she finally realized what was happening, it would be too late for her to stop it. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the peaceful neighborhood beyond. It was almost serene, but in my head, all I could see was destruction. I wasn't going to be the fool anymore. No, this time I would be the one pulling the strings. This time I was going to win. Over the next few days, I perfected my mask. Camilla had no idea that I knew. She went about her routines, kissed me on the cheek as she left for work, smiled at the kids, played the role of a devoted wife and mother. It took every ounce of self-control not to tear that mask off her face and confront her with the truth, but I held back. I had to. I wasn't ready to strike yet. Not until everything was in place. My meeting with Carl was set for the weekend. I'd planned it carefully under the guise of an old friend catching up. Camilla wouldn't suspect a thing. In the meantime, I continued to gather more evidence. I needed to be thorough to ensure that when I pulled the trigger, there would be no escape for any of them. I knew Ivan wouldn't stay hidden forever. He was too arrogant for that. Sure enough, 2 days later, I saw his name flash on Camilla's phone while we were watching TV. I pretended not to notice, acted engrossed in whatever mindless show he had on, but I was listening, waiting for her reaction. She glanced at the screen, quickly flipped her phone over, and shifted in her seat, her body tensing just slightly. The small tell was enough to confirm it. He was still in contact with her. Later that night, after she had fallen asleep, I took her phone. It was too easy, really. She never bothered with changing the password. Why would she? She never thought I'd have reason to look. I scrolled through the messages. They were careful, vague, but the meaning was clear enough. There were plans to meet in a few days. The text didn't specify where, just a time, but I didn't need more than that. The timing was perfect. I could use their next meeting to my advantage. I was starting to feel the pull of the plan taking shape, every detail clicking into place. This wasn't going to be a messy confrontation. It was going to be a clean, precise operation, one that left them with nothing and me with everything. The next morning, I sent the kids off to school and left the house early, telling Camilla I had some errands to run. I made a quick stop at my lawyer's office. I wasn't filing anything yet, but I wanted to be prepared. We discussed the divorce process, child custody, and the financials. Camilla wouldn't see it coming, not until the papers were served. I'd make sure of that. Once that was done, I met with Carl in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town. He was the kind of man who dealt with situations like mine discreetly, efficiently. When I walked in, he was already seated at a back table, a drink in hand. He gave me a nod as I approached, his eyes sharp and knowing. "Max," he greeted, extending a hand. "Long time." I shook his hand and sat down. There was no small talk. I didn't have the patience for it. "I need a favor," I said, leaning in. Carl raised an eyebrow, swirling his drink. I figured. "What's the job?" I took a deep breath, laying it all out for him. The affair, the betrayal, Ivan, my plan to ruin him. Carl listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he nodded slowly, setting his glass down. "Damn. That's a hell of a situation. You sure you want to go down this road?" I nodded. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. He leaned back, rubbing his chin. "All right, I can dig up some dirt on Ivan, but it won't come cheap. If he's clean, it'll be harder, but everyone has something. We'll find it. I don't care about the cost." "Just get it done," I replied, my voice low and firm. Carl gave me a sharp look. "I'll need a couple of weeks to get everything together. But when I do, he won't have a leg to stand on." I nodded, sliding an envelope across the table. It contained a down payment, enough to cover whatever initial digging Carl needed to do. He took it without a word, pocketing it smoothly. "And Camilla?" he asked after a pause, his eyes narrowing. "You sure you don't want to handle her first?" I shook my head. "Not yet. She's going to watch Ivan burn first. Then I'll deal with her." Carl smirked, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Cold. I like it." I left the bar feeling a dark satisfaction. Things were in motion now, and there was no turning back. Ivan wouldn't see it coming. By the time Carl was finished with him, his life would be in ruins. His business, his reputation, everything he held dear would be stripped from him. He'd be a pariah. And once Ivan was reduced to nothing, I would turn my sights on Camilla. It was only a matter of time before her world crumbled, too. I would make sure she felt every ounce of the pain she had inflicted on me, on our family. This was no longer just about betrayal. It was about dismantling everything she had built, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. That night, when I returned home, Camilla was already asleep. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom for a moment, watching her. She looked peaceful, as if she didn't have a care in the world. But soon that peace would shatter. She had no idea that the ground beneath her was already beginning to crack. And when the time came, I would be there to watch her fall. The following days passed in a strange, calculated calm. On the surface, life went on as usual, me going to work, Camilla handling the kids, the routine of our everyday lives seemingly intact. But beneath that normalcy, there was a quiet storm brewing, and only I could feel it. I was counting down the days until Carl would deliver the dirt on Ivan. Every time I thought about him, I felt my fists clench involuntarily. I imagined all the times he had walked into my home, sitting down at my table, drinking with me, laughing with my children, all while stabbing me in the back. The anger would flare up, but I'd tamp it down, knowing I had to stay focused. Revenge was best served cold, and this dish was nearly ready. In the meantime, I kept a close eye on Camilla. She was still in the dark, her movements predictable, her behavior as deceitful as ever. She had no idea that I knew about the upcoming rendezvous with Ivan. She had no idea that I had already started plotting their downfall. I was sitting in my office one afternoon, pretending to work, when a message popped up on my phone. It was from Carl. "Meet me tomorrow. I've got something." My pulse quickened. I typed back a quick confirmation, then stared at the screen for a moment, my heart pounding. It was happening. The noose was tightening around Ivan's neck, and soon I'd pull the rope. The next day, I left the house early, telling Camilla I had a work meeting out of town. She smiled at me, that same sweet smile I used to love, and told me to drive safely. It took everything in me to return the smile, to act like nothing was wrong. I kissed her goodbye, knowing it might be the last time I did so, with her still believing she held any power over me. I met Carl at a small diner just outside the city. He was already there, seated at the back, nursing a cup of coffee. When I walked in, he gave me a nod, gesturing for me to sit. He had a folder sitting in front of him, thick with papers. "I got what you asked for," he said, pushing the folder across the table toward me. "Ivan's not as clean as he pretends to be." I took the folder, my hands almost shaking as I opened it. Inside was a treasure trove of Ivan's secrets. Financial records, shady business deals, and something even better, proof of an affair with someone else before Camilla. It wasn't just me he'd been betraying. Ivan was the kind of man who left a trail of destruction wherever he went, and now I had the evidence to ruin him. Carl smirked, leaning back in his seat as I sifted through the papers. He's been laundering money through his company for years. Nothing big enough to catch the authorities' attention, but if this gets out, he's finished. I nodded, my mind already spinning with possibilities. Ivan would be ruined, I'd make sure of that. But I wasn't ready to pull the trigger just yet, not until I had everything in place. "You want me to handle the leak?" Carl asked, raising an eyebrow. "Not yet," I said, closing the folder. "I'll decide when the time is right, but keep this quiet until then." Carl shrugged, sipping his coffee. "Your call. Just know that once it's out there, it's going to get messy." "You sure you want to go this far?" I met his gaze, my voice low and steady. "I'm sure." He nodded, tapping the table lightly. "All right, Max. But remember, once you drop this bomb, there's no going back." I stood up, sliding the folder into my bag. There was no going back the moment I found out about the affair. Carl gave me a knowing look, then waved me off as I left the diner, the weight of the folder pulling down on my shoulder like a loaded gun. The next phase was ready, and now I just had to wait for the right moment to fire the first shot. When I got back home, the house was empty. Camilla was out with the kids, likely running errands or preparing for her next meetup with Ivan. I went to my study, locked the door, and opened the folder again. I spent hours going through every detail, every dirty secret Ivan had tried to bury. When I was done, I knew I had enough to destroy him. The satisfaction I felt was cold, dark, but it filled the emptiness that had been gnawing at me for weeks. That night, as I sat across from Camilla at dinner, I felt the power shift. She still had no idea that her entire world was on the verge of collapse. I watched her laugh with the kids, listened to her talk about mundane things, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel rage. I felt control. The moment was coming. Ivan's ruin was inevitable, but I wanted to time it perfectly. I wanted Camilla to feel the panic, the unraveling of everything she thought she had secured. It wasn't enough to just expose Ivan. I had to make sure it shattered her too. In a few days, they would meet. I would let them have their little rendezvous, one last taste of their forbidden relationship. Then I would strike. And by the time the dust settled, there would be nothing left for either of them. The morning of their rendezvous, I woke up early, the weight of what was about to happen heavy in the air. Camilla was already up, moving around the house with a lightness that made my stomach turn. She thought today would be like any other, that she'd go off to meet Ivan, laugh and share in their twisted little secret, then come back home to play the perfect wife. I played along, as I always did. Over breakfast, I smiled at her, asked her what her plans were for the day. She barely looked at me as she answered, the usual lie rolling off her tongue. Just running some errands, meeting up with a friend for lunch, she said, her voice casual. I nodded, pretending to be distracted by my coffee. Inside, I was counting down the minutes. When she left the house, dressed in what I now recognized as her affair clothes, my jaw clenched, but I kept my composure. She kissed me goodbye, like she always did, and I let her, even though the touch of her lips made my skin crawl. The moment she was out the door, I grabbed my phone and called Carl. They're meeting today, I told him, my voice low and steady. I want you to follow them. Get everything on camera. Every touch, every glance. Carl chuckled on the other end of the line. Already ahead of you, Max. I've got my guy ready. You'll be there with a camera, no one the wiser? Good, I said, my grip tightening on the phone. I want no mistakes. There won't be. By the end of today, you'll have everything you need. I hung up and stared at the door Camilla had walked out of, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. Today, they would have no idea that their time together was being documented, that their every move was being captured. And soon I would have the final piece of evidence I needed. I spent the rest of the day waiting, pacing the house like a caged animal. The tension was unbearable, but I knew I had to keep my cool. I had come this far, and I couldn't afford to lose my nerve now. In the afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Carl. Got it. We'll send everything over in an hour. My heart pounded as I read the message. It was happening. All the lies, all the betrayal that was about to be laid bare. I would have irrefutable proof of their affair, and there would be no way for Camilla to talk her way out of it. The hour stretched on, every second feeling like an eternity. Finally, my phone buzzed again. A new message from Carl. Check your email. I opened my laptop, logged into my email, and there it was, a folder filled with photos and videos. I clicked on the first file, and my blood ran cold. There they were, sitting together at a cafe, leaning in close, laughing like two people with no cares in the world. As I scrolled through the images, I saw Ivan reach out and take her hand across the table. The intimacy between them was unmistakable. I clicked on the next file of video. The camera zoomed in just as Camilla leaned in and kissed him, her hand resting on his chest. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands trembling with fury. It was one thing to suspect, to imagine the betrayal. It was another to see it so clearly, right in front of me. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Camilla would be home soon, blissfully unaware of the storm about to hit her. I could already picture the look on her face when I confronted her, when I showed her the evidence, when I watched her world crumble. But that wasn't enough. No, I wanted her to feel it all, to experience the same gut-wrenching pain, the same sense of helplessness I had felt. I wanted to time it perfectly. And the time was coming. I could feel it. The house was quiet when Camilla returned that evening. I sat in the living room, my laptop closed, the folder of evidence hidden but ready. My heart was steady now. The rage I had felt earlier had settled into something colder, more dangerous. This was the calm before the storm. She walked in, smiling, her cheeks flushed. I wondered if she was thinking about Ivan, replaying their little tryst in her mind. The thought made me sick, but I kept my face neutral. I wasn't ready to reveal the truth just yet. Hey, she said, setting her purse down. How was your day? I nodded, barely meeting her eyes. Fine. Yours? Busy, she replied, a slight hesitation in her voice. It was almost laughable how easily she lied now. So casual, so practiced. She walked over and kissed me on the cheek. I didn't flinch. I had gotten good at pretending. As she moved to walk away, I stopped her with one word. Camilla. She paused, turning to face me. Yeah. I need to show you something. There must have been something in my voice because her smile faltered. What is it? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened the laptop, clicked on the folder, and turned the screen toward her. The images filled the screen, her and Ivan at the cafe, her hand in his, their kiss, the intimacy unmistakable. Her face went pale, her body stiffening as she stared at the screen. For a moment, she said nothing, just blinking in disbelief. Then she looked at me, her eyes wide with shock. Max, Don't, I interrupted, my voice cold. Don't say a word. She swallowed, her hands trembling. Now, I can explain. Explain, I snapped, my calm facade cracking just for a second. Explain what, Camilla? That you've been screwing my stepbrother behind my back for years, that you've lied to me, to our children. There's no explaining this. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no mercy. I didn't mean for it to happen. You didn't mean for it to happen. I stood up, my voice rising. You didn't mean for it to happen, but it happened over and over again, didn't it? She tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. Max, please. I don't want your apologies. I don't want your excuses. It's too late for that. Her tears were flowing freely now, but I stayed cold. This was what I wanted her broken, her world unraveling in front of her. You've destroyed everything, I said quietly, the weight of the words settling in. Our marriage, our family, it's all gone. She fell to her knees, sobbing, begging, but I didn't care. The sight of her crumbling was supposed to bring satisfaction, but all I felt was emptiness. The truth was out, and yet it didn't heal the wounds. It didn't undo the betrayal. I grabbed my bag. The divorce papers already signed inside. I'll be staying somewhere else, I said, turning toward the door. You'll hear from my lawyer. As I walked out, her sobs echoed behind me, but I didn't look back. I was free, but it didn't feel like victory. It just felt like the end.